My son bought a mansion he could not afford and handed me the bill like I was a waiter at a restaurant. He looked me in the eye and said I owed him a childhood. When I refused to sign away my entire pension to pay for his wife's vanity project, they did not just leave. They sued me for $500,000. They thought I was just a senile old man from the south side of Chicago. They forgot that before I retired, I spent 30 years staring down union busters and steel magnates. They wanted a war over money. I gave them a lesson in pain. My name is Booker. I am 70 years old. Before I tell you how I destroyed my own son's financial delusions, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I want to know how far this story travels. The silence in my house was heavy enough to crush a man. It was the kind of silence that settles into the floorboards when you have lived alone for too long. I sat at the head of the dining table, my hands folded over the tablecloth Etta used to save for Sundays. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked, tick-tock, tick-tock. It was 8:45 in the evening. They were 45 minutes late. On the table, the pot roast I had started cooking at noon was sitting in the center, slowly turning into a cold gray lump. The collard greens had lost their steam. I looked at the empty chair across from me. A framed photograph of Etta rested there. It was the 10th anniversary of the day her heart stopped beating. I had told Darius this dinner was important. I told him to be on time. When headlights finally flashed against the front window, I did not feel relief. I felt the old ache in my knuckles, the same ache I used to get before a strike vote at the steel mill. The front door opened without a knock. Darius walked in first. My boy is 32 years old, 6 feet tall, and wearing a suit that I knew cost more than my first car. But he walked with his shoulders hunched, his eyes darting around the room like he was afraid the walls were going to judge him. Behind him came Tiffany, my daughter-in-law. She stepped into my living room like she was stepping into a dirty puddle. She was a petite white woman with blonde hair sprayed so stiff it probably would not move in a tornado. She scanned my old velvet sofa, the worn carpet, and the cabinet full of porcelain figurines Etta had collected for 40 years. She did not say hello. She just wrinkled her nose and muttered something that sounded like it smells like mothballs in here. They did not apologize for being late. They did not look at the food. They did not look at the picture of Etta. They sat down. I picked up the carving knife to slice the cold roast. I was about to ask where my grandson Leo was, even though I knew they would not bring him to the south side at night. But Tiffany did not give me the chance. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick blue folder. She dropped it onto the table. It landed right next to Etta's picture with a heavy thud that rattled the silverware. "We are not hungry," Booker Tiffany said. Her voice was sharp like breaking glass. "We have business to discuss." I put the knife down. I looked at Darius. He was staring at his polished shoes. "What is this?" I asked. "Open it," Tiffany said. She tapped a manicured fingernail on the cover. "It is our future, and yours if you decide to finally be useful." I opened the folder. It was a mortgage agreement. I put on my reading glasses, the ones with the taped frame, and looked at the numbers. My heart skipped a beat, not from excitement, but from shock. It was a purchase agreement for a property in Winnetka, the North Shore. Old money. White money. The price listed was $1.2 million. I turned the page. The interest rate was adjustable, a trap for fools. The monthly payment was estimated at $8,500. And there at the bottom of the page, under the line for guarantor and cosigner, was my name. Booker T. Washington. I looked up. Darius was finally looking at me, his eyes pleading, sweating despite the chill in the house. "You bought a house?" I said, my voice low and steady. "We made an offer," Darius said, his voice cracking. "It is a dream home, Dad. 5 bedrooms, a pool, great schools for Leo. It is everything I never had growing up." I looked back at the paper. 1.2 million. "Darius," I said, "you are a logistics manager. You make $60,000 a year. Tiffany does not work. How in God's name do you think you can afford an $8,000 mortgage?" Tiffany let out a dry, cruel laugh. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on my table. "That is where you come in, Booker. We know about the accounts. We know you have money rotting away in those retirement funds. You live in this dump. You drive a 15-year-old truck. You do not spend a dime. What are you saving it for? To be the richest corpse in the cemetery." I felt the heat rise up my neck. It was not anger yet. It was the cold realization that my son had discussed my finances with this woman who looked at me like I was the help. "This is my pension," I said. "This is money I broke my back for in the steel mills. This is the money Etta and I saved so we would never be a burden to anyone." You are already a burden, Tiffany spat back. You are a burden on our social standing. Do you know how embarrassing it is to tell our friends that Darius' father lives in this neighborhood? We are trying to build a legacy here. Legacy, I repeated. You want me to sign a guarantee. Do you know what that means? It means when you miss a payment, and you will miss a payment, the bank comes for me. They take my savings. They take this house. So what? Darius shouted. He slammed his hand on the table. This house is garbage anyway. Sell it. Move into the guest suite in the new house. We are offering you a chance to live like a human being instead of a rat. You owe me this, Dad. You were always working. You were never there. You missed my games. You missed my plays. You owe me. I looked at my son. I saw the little boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee. I also saw the weak man he had become. He did not know I worked triple shifts so he could go to that private school where he was the only black face in the class. He did not know I missed his games because I was sitting across from racists in boardroom negotiations fighting for a 10-cent raise for 3,000 workers. I closed the folder. I slid it back across the table toward them. No, I said. The room went deadly silent. The clock ticked. Tick-tock. Excuse me, Tiffany whispered. Her eyes narrowed into slits. I said no. I repeated, my voice hard as iron. I will not sign. I will not pay for a house I cannot afford, and neither can you. If you want a house, buy one you can pay for. Tiffany stood up so fast her chair tipped over. She grabbed the folder. Her face was twisted in an ugly snarl. I told you, she hissed at Darius. I told you he was a selfish, miserly old man. She turned to me. You think you can just say no. You think you have a choice. I remained seated. I picked up my fork and stabbed a piece of the cold meat. I suggest you leave. Tiffany grabbed Darius by the arm and hauled him up. She leaned down until her face was inches from mine. I could smell her expensive perfume cloying and sweet, masking the scent of rot. Fine, she said. Keep your money. Keep your pathetic little house. But listen to me closely, Booker. If you do not sign these papers by Monday, you will never see Leo again. I will scrub you from his life. He will grow up thinking his grandfather is dead. Darius looked at me, his eyes wet with shame and fear, but he did not stop her. He let her say it. They walked out. The front door slammed with a force that shook the walls. Edda's picture frame rattled against the wood of the table. I sat there alone in the silence. I looked at the cold food. I looked at my trembling hands. They wanted to use my grandson as a hostage. They wanted to blackmail me with the only thing I had left to love. I took a bite of the roast. It was dry and tasteless. I swallowed it anyway. I needed my strength. They had fired the first shot, but they did not know who they were dealing with. I reached into my pocket and took out my heart medication. I swallowed the pill without water. If they wanted to play the game of leverage, they were about to learn why the Steel Barons used to hate seeing Booker T. Washington walk into the room. That night I did not sleep. I sat by the window and watched the streetlights flicker. I knew this was not over. But I did not know that 3 days later, a sheriff deputy would be banging on my door at dawn, holding a lawsuit that would demand everything I had. The front door closed, and the silence that followed was heavier than the steel beams I used to carry. I scraped the cold pot roast into the trash can. It felt like a sin to waste food Edda would have cherished, but I had no appetite. My chest felt tight, a familiar pressure that had become my constant companion since the factory days. I reached for the amber pill bottle on the counter. My hands were shaking. I dry swallowed the heart medication and gripped the edge of the sink. I looked down at my hands. They are ugly hands to some people. The skin is thick and rough like leather left out in the sun. The knuckles are swollen. There are burn scars on my forearms from the blast furnace that never faded. These hands spent 30 years working triple shifts in the heat and the filth. These hands pounded tables in union halls fighting for a 10-cent raise so my son would never have to touch a shovel. I broke my body so Darius could have soft hands. I destroyed my lungs breathing in soot so he could breathe the filtered air of a corporate office. And now he stood in my house in a $3,000 suit and looked at me with shame. He had forgotten where he came from. He had forgotten that the very ground he walked on was paid for with my sweat and his mother's blood. The bitterness rose in my throat, tasting worse than the medicine. The next morning, the sky was gray and cold over Chicago. It was Tuesday. Tuesdays were the days I picked up my grandson Leo from the private academy in the suburbs. It was the highlight of my week. I parked my 15-year-old truck in the line of gleaming luxury SUVs and Teslas. I could feel the eyes of the other parents on me, but I held my head high. I walked to the gate just as the bell rang. I saw Leo's teacher, Mrs. Gable, standing with her clipboard. I smiled and raised my hand. She did not smile back. Instead, she signaled to the school security guard. A man twice my size stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "Mr. Washington," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "You need to step back. You are not allowed on the premises." I was confused. I tried to step around him. "I am here for my grandson," I said. The principal walked out. She looked at me with a mixture of fear and disdain. She held up a sheet of paper. "Your name has been removed from the authorized pickup list, Booker." She showed me the list. My name was there, but a thick red line had been drawn through it. Next to my name in bold red letters was a note. It read, "Violent tendencies, unstable, potential threat to student safety." I felt the blood drain from my face. Violent, unstable. I was the man who donated the books to their library. I was the man who volunteered at the bake sale. I looked past the guard and saw a white Range Rover pull up to the curb. Tiffany stepped out. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a designer coat. She walked past me without looking at my face. She grabbed Leo's hand as he walked out the door. Leo saw me. His face lit up. "Grandpa," he shouted. He tried to run to me. Tiffany yanked him back so hard he stumbled. She leaned down and whispered something in his ear while pointing at me. Then she looked at the other parents who were watching us. She shook her head and touched her chest, acting the part of the terrified victim protecting her child from a monster. I stood there paralyzed. They had turned me into a threat. They had used the color of my skin and my working-class appearance to paint me as a danger to my own flesh and blood. I watched the woman who stole my son drag away the only pure thing left in my life. I drove home with a fire burning in my gut. My hands gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The house felt empty and cold. I sat in my armchair in the dark, listening to the clock tick. My phone buzzed on the side table. I picked it up. It was a text message from Darius. I opened it and my breath hitched. It was a photo of Leo. He was sitting on the floor of their expensive new house. His face was red and blotchy. Tears were streaming down his cheeks. He was reaching out for the camera, crying for me. Underneath the photo was a text message. It was short and cruel. "Dad, you know how to fix this. Sign the papers." They were weaponizing a child's pain. They were breaking a little boy's heart to force my hand. I stared at the screen until it went black. They thought this would break me. They thought this would make me sign their mortgage. They were wrong. This did not make me weak. It made me ready for war. 6 in the morning on the south side of Chicago is usually a time for silence and the smell of brewing coffee. But that Wednesday, the silence was shattered by a pounding on my front door that sounded less like a visitor and more like a raid. I was already awake, sitting in my armchair and watching the sun try to break through the gray smog. I walked to the door, my bad knee protesting the sudden movement. I opened it to find a wall of tan uniform. It was a Cook County Sheriff's deputy. He was a young white man with a face of stone, and he was holding a thick envelope. "Booker T. Washington," he asked. I nodded. "You are being served." He shoved the papers into my chest and turned on his heel without another word. I stepped out onto my porch. The cool morning air hit my face, but I felt a different kind of chill. I looked across the street. Mrs. Higgins, who has lived on this block as long as I have, was peeking through her blinds. Mr. Miller was pausing while walking his dog, staring at the squad car parked in front of my driveway. I felt the heat of shame rise up my neck. For 40 years, I had been the man people came to for help. I was the man who organized the block parties. I was the man who mediated disputes before the police had to be called. Now I was the one with the law on my doorstep. I was the suspect. I gripped the envelope tight enough to crinkle the pages. Darius knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that for a black man of my generation, police presence at your home is not just an annoyance, it is a stain on your character. It is a public humiliation. I walked back inside and closed the door, shutting out the prying eyes of the neighborhood. I laid the envelope on the dining table right where Tiffany had placed the mortgage papers days before. My hands were steady now. The shock was gone, replaced by the cold clarity I used to feel before walking into a hostile negotiation. I opened the seal. I sat down and put on my spectacles. I have read thousands of contracts in my life. I know how to look for the fine print and the loopholes, but nothing could have prepared me for the lies written in black and white on these pages. The plaintiffs were Darius Washington and Tiffany Washington. The defendant was me. They were suing me for $500,000. I read the legal causes of action and my blood ran cold. Promissory estoppel, unjust enrichment, breach of verbal contract. I read the complaint twice just to make sure my eyes were not deceiving me. Paragraph 4 stated that I, Booker Washington, had entered into a verbal agreement with my son. It claimed that I had promised to pay them $500,000 in exchange for them moving back to Chicago to provide daily care and assistance for my declining health. I laughed a dry, bitter sound in the empty house. Declining health. I walked 3 miles every morning. I mowed my own lawn. I fixed my own roof last summer. I had never asked them for a glass of water, let alone daily care. They were painting a picture of a frail, senile old man who had lured his children home with false promises of wealth and then trapped them. It was a complete fabrication. But as I read on, I saw the cruelty in their strategy. They claimed they had quit their jobs and uprooted their lives in reliance on my promise. They claimed I had benefited from their presence and was now unjustly enriching myself by withholding the payment. It was a lie designed to destroy me in court. They knew there was no written contract, so they invented a story that made them look like victims and me like a manipulative tyrant. They were using my independence against me, twisting the knife of my own generosity. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the complaint. It was not just a lawyer's signature. It was signed by Darius under penalty of perjury. My son was willing to lie to a judge to get his hands on my pension. I reached for the phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Reggie answered on the second ring. Reggie was a retired federal prosecutor, a man I had known since we were boys, running the streets of Bronzeville. He listened in silence as I read him the key paragraphs of the lawsuit. When I finished, he let out a long sigh. "Booker, this is bad," he said, his voice grave. "This is not just a lawsuit, it is a shakedown. They are using promissory estoppel because it is hard to disprove a verbal promise without hard evidence. It becomes a he said, she said situation, and juries often sympathize with the young, struggling family over the wealthy retiree. Reggie warned me that this was going to get ugly. They will try to paint you as mentally incompetent," he said. "They will try to prove you forgot the promise because of old age. You need to be ready for war, Booker, because they are not coming for a settlement, they are coming for your throat." I thanked him and hung up. I needed to clear my head. I needed to get out of this house that suddenly felt like a prison. I grabbed my wallet and keys and headed to the grocery store. I needed milk and bread, simple things to remind me that life was still going on. I walked the aisles like a ghost, nodding to people I had known for years, wondering if they had seen the sheriff at my door. I got to the checkout counter. The cashier was a nice girl named Sarah who always asked about my garden. I slid my debit card into the machine. It beeped, declined. I frowned. That was impossible. I had perfect credit. I had never missed a bill in 50 years. I tried it again. Beep, declined. A line was forming behind me. I could feel the impatience of the customers. Sarah looked at me with pity. "Maybe you have another card, Mr. Washington," she suggested softly. I pulled out my credit card, the one I kept for emergencies. I inserted it. Beep, declined. Call authorizer. My stomach dropped to the floor. I left the groceries on the counter, muttering an apology I did not mean, and walked out. I went straight to the ATM in the vestibule. I punched in my PIN. Balance 0. Available funds 0. A message flashed on the screen. Account frozen by court order. I stared at the glowing green letters. They had filed a temporary restraining order against my assets. They had convinced a judge that I was likely to hide or dissipate my money before the trial. They had locked me out of my own life. I stood there in the vestibule of the grocery store with $200 in cash in my pocket and the realization that my son had not just sued me. He had put a noose around my neck and kicked away the chair. They wanted to starve me out. They wanted to break me. But as I walked back to my truck, I did not feel broken. I felt the old steel hardening in my spine. If they wanted a fight, they were going to get one. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I was old. I was tired. But I was Booker T. Washington, and I had never lost a negotiation in my life. I walked into the pawn shop on 47th Street with my head high but my stomach in knots. The bell on the door jingled, a cheerful sound that clashed with the smell of dust and desperation hanging in the air. I approached the counter where a man with grease-stained fingers was examining a trumpet. I waited until he was done. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the velvet box I had kept in my nightstand for 10 years. Inside was a gold Rolex. It was not just a watch. It was the only thing the steel mill gave me when I retired after 40 years of breathing their smoke and fixing their messes. On the back it was engraved, "To Booker, for loyalty and service." I placed it on the glass counter. The pawnbroker picked it up. He did not look at the engraving. He did not look at the weight of the gold. He just put a loop to his eye and grunted. I told him I needed $3,000. It was enough to pay the initial retainer for a lawyer to fight the freeze on my accounts. He laughed, a dry hacking sound. "I will give you 800. I felt the anger rise, but I pushed it down. This was not a negotiation. This was survival. I told him it was worth 5 times that. He shrugged and started to push it back to me. 1,000, I said. He stopped. 1,200, he countered. Take it or leave it. I looked at the watch. I looked at the reward for 4 decades of my life. I nodded. He counted out the bills. $1,200. It felt light in my hand. It felt like I was selling my dignity to buy a weapon to fight my own blood. I walked out of the shop feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. I had the cash. But I had left a piece of my history behind in a cage of glass and steel. 2 hours later, I walked into the Starbucks on Michigan Avenue. It was neutral ground. Public. Safe. Or so I thought. I saw Darius sitting in a corner booth. He was wearing an Italian suit that shimmered under the track lighting. He had sunglasses on even though we were inside. He looked like a man trying to be someone important. He looked like a stranger. I sat down across from him. I did not buy a coffee. I could not afford to waste $5 on bean water. Darius took off his glasses. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked tired. He pushed a piece of paper across the table. It was not the lawsuit. It was a loan guarantee form from the bank. "Dad," he said, his voice low, "we can end this right now. Just sign this. The lawsuit goes away. The restraining order on your accounts goes away. You can have your life back." I looked at the paper. It was a deal with the devil. If I signed, I would be liable for a $1.2 million mortgage. If I did not sign, they would bleed me dry in court. "It is a simple solution," Dad Darius continued. "You have the assets. You just guarantee the loan. You do not even have to pay anything unless we default. And we won't default. I got a promotion coming up. Tiffany is starting her brand. We just need a little help to get started." I looked at him. A promotion. He was a warehouse manager. There was no promotion that would cover an $8,000 mortgage. He was lying to himself, and he wanted me to pay for the lie. Before I could answer, a shadow fell over the table. Tiffany walked up. She was wearing a white dress and holding a latte. She did not sit down. She stood over me like a queen inspecting a peasant. "Is he signing?" she asked Darius. Darius shook his head. "He is thinking about it." Tiffany let out a sharp breath. She looked at me with pure venom in her eyes. "You know what the problem is with you old black men?" she said, her voice loud enough for the next table to hear. "You hold on to money like a slave holds on to a meal. You are so afraid of losing what little you have that you cannot see when you have won. You have a chance to elevate your family Booker, to bring us into the modern world, but you would rather hoard your pennies and die alone in that ghetto." I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. She had said the quiet part out loud. She did not see me as a father or a man. She saw me as a historical artifact, a relic of a time she thought was beneath her. She thought my caution was fear. She thought my saving was stinginess. She did not know that I saved because I knew how fast the world could take it away from a man like me. I did not say a word. I slowly reached into my pocket and tapped the screen of my phone. The recording app was running. I had captured every word. I looked up at her. "I am not signing," I said. "Not today. Not ever." Tiffany slammed her hand on the table, spilling her latte. "Then enjoy being homeless," she hissed. "Come on, Darius." She turned and marched out. Darius looked at me one last time. There was no apology in his eyes, just a terrifying blankness. He stood up and followed her, leaving me alone with the spilled coffee and the recording that would bury them. I took the bus home. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruises of purple and black. I walked up my driveway, my hand in my pocket clutching the $1,200. I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Something was wrong. The air felt different. I looked at the living room window. It was shattered, jagged shards of glass stuck out of the frame like teeth. A cold wind was blowing the curtains inside. I ran up the steps, ignoring the pain in my knees. I pushed open the front door. There, in the middle of my living room floor, amidst a sea of broken glass, lay a brick. It was a paver stone, heavy and gray. Wrapped around it with a rubber band was a piece of notebook paper. I picked it up. I unfolded it. In block letters written in black marker, it said, "Pay up or burn." I looked around my empty house, my sanctuary. It had been violated. This was not a lawsuit anymore. This was not a family dispute. This was a siege. They were not just coming for my money, they were coming for my safety. They wanted me to be afraid. They wanted me to cower in the dark and sign whatever they put in front of me. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. It was empty, but I knew they were watching. I knew they were waiting. I felt the fear, yes. But underneath the fear was something else. Something hot and hard. I went to the kitchen and pulled a chair under the door handle. I checked the back locks. I sat down in the dark with the brick in my lap. They had thrown a rock through my window. They had threatened to burn my home. They thought this would end it. But they had forgotten one thing. You do not start a fire in the house of a man who has walked through a blast furnace. You just remind him that he is fireproof. I gripped the brick. If it was a war they wanted, it was a war they were going to get. Reggie's office smelled of old paper and stale cigar smoke. It was a smell I had not encountered since the backroom deals of the 90s, but it was comforting. It smelled like work. Reggie sat behind a desk that looked like it had survived a bomb blast buried under stacks of case files and law books. He was typing furiously on a computer that hummed like a dying generator. I sat across from him watching the cursor blink. We were not looking at the lawsuit anymore. We were looking for the truth. I had a legal right to see my son's financial history because 15 years ago I had co-signed his student loans. I had put my name on the line so he could get a degree in business administration. I thought I was investing in his future. Now I realized I had just given myself a front row seat to his destruction. Reggie pulled up the credit report. The screen filled with red numbers. I put on my glasses and leaned in. What I saw made my stomach turn. Darius was making $60,000 a year as a logistics manager. It was a decent wage, a respectable wage, but the outflow was a hemorrhage. I saw a lease agreement for a Porsche Macan, $1,200 a month. I saw credit card statements from Amex and Chase, both maxed out to their $30,000 limits. The charges were nauseating. Gucci, Louis Vuitton, 5-star restaurants in the Loop, weekend trips to Napa Valley. I looked at Tiffany's file. Employment status unemployed. Occupation influencer. Income zero. Yet her spending was 3 times higher than Darius. She was burning through money they did not have trying to live a life they saw on Instagram. They were spending $15,000 a month. They were drowning in debt and using credit cards to bail out the water. I looked at Reggie. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Booker," he said softly, "this is not just bad math. This is a catastrophe. Your son is insolvent. If he misses one paycheck, he is on the street. That is why they are so desperate for your pension. They do not want to build a legacy. They want to plug a hole in the Titanic with your retirement money." I felt a wave of nausea. My son was not just irresponsible. He was living a lie. He was walking around in suits he could not afford, driving a car he did not own, trying to impress a woman who saw him as nothing more than an ATM machine with a pulse. But there was something else. Something that did not add up. I pointed to the mortgage application they had tried to force me to sign. The numbers were wrong. "Pull up the property records, Reggie," I said. "Look at the house in Winnetka." Reggie typed in the address. The property details popped up. It was a 5-bedroom colonial on a half-acre lot. Nice enough. But then we looked at the valuation. The tax assessment valued the property at $750,000. The recent sales in the neighborhood for similar homes topped out at $800,000. I looked at the purchase agreement again. The sale price was listed at $1.2 million. They were overpaying by $400,000. Why would anyone buy a house for 50% more than it is worth, I asked. Even a fool knows to check the price tag. Darius works in logistics. He knows value. He knows numbers. Why would he agree to this? Reggie scrolled down to the seller information. The house was not being sold by a family or an individual. It was being sold by a limited liability company, an LLC. The seller was listed as Prestige Holdings LLC. Reggie frowned. That is a generic name, Booker. It could be anyone. Find out who owns it, I said. My voice was cold. I used to trace shell companies for the union when management tried to hide profits. I knew the game. Find out who is behind Prestige Holdings. Reggie navigated to the Secretary of State Business Registry. He typed in the name. The search wheel spun. I held my breath. The results loaded. Prestige Holdings LLC. Registered Agent Stuart P. Miller. The name hit me like a physical blow. I knew that name. I had seen it on the wedding invitation 3 years ago. I had seen it on the expensive gifts that sat unopened at the reception because they were just empty boxes for show. Stuart Miller. Tiffany's father. I sat back in my chair and the whole picture clicked into place like a steel trap snapping shut. It was not a house purchase. It was a money laundering scheme. Stuart Miller was a failed real estate developer. I had heard the rumors. He was leveraged to the hilt, owing money to banks and private investors all over the city. He was drowning just like his daughter. This was the plan. Stuart sells a house he owns to his son-in-law for $400,000 more than it is worth. Darius takes out a loan for $1.2 million using my pension as collateral to guarantee it. The bank pays Stuart the full amount. Stuart pays off his debts with the inflated profit. Darius gets a house he cannot afford. And when Darius inevitably defaults because he cannot make the payments, the bank comes after me. They take my savings. They take my home. And Stuart walks away clean with my money in his pocket. My son was not just buying a home. He was the bagman for a con artist. And he was willing to sacrifice his own father to do it. Reggie looked at me. His face was pale. Booker, he said, this is fraud. This is mortgage fraud. This is a federal crime. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. I felt a coldness spreading through my veins that had nothing to do with the winter air. They thought I was a mark. They thought I was a stupid old man who would sign anything to see his grandson. They did not know that I had spent 30 years reading the fine print in contracts written by men much smarter and much more ruthless than Stuart Miller. Print it all out, Reggie, I said. Print the credit reports, print the LLC registration, print the property valuation. Reggie hit the print button. The printer whirred to life, churning out the evidence of my family's betrayal. I am going to see Stuart, I said. Reggie stood up. Booker, do not do anything rash. These people are dangerous. They are desperate. I picked up the stack of warm paper. I am not going to be rash, Reggie. I am going to be precise. I am going to look that man in the eye, and I am going to tell him that he picked the wrong family to rob. I walked out of the office into the cold wind. I had the evidence. I had the truth. Now I just needed the opportunity to use it. I got into my truck and started the engine. It roared to life, a sound of pure mechanical anger. I pointed the nose north toward the suburbs. It was time to meet the in-laws. The North Shore Country Club was a fortress of green manicured lawns and old white money. It was a place where men like me were usually seen carrying golf bags or serving drinks, but never walking onto the green with a purpose that had nothing to do with the game. I parked my rusted Ford truck between a Mercedes and a Bentley. The valet looked at me as if I was lost, but I walked past him before he could open his mouth. I knew where to find Stuart Miller. Reggie had pulled his schedule. Stuart played 18 holes every Wednesday afternoon, rain or shine, because he did not have a job to go to. I found him on the 14th hole. He was wearing pastel yellow pants and a white polo shirt that stretched tight over his belly. He was lining up a putt. I walked right onto the green. My work boots left heavy indentations in the perfect grass. Stuart looked up. He did not look surprised. He looked annoyed, like a man interrupted by a fly. "Booker," he said, "you are trespassing. This is a private club." I stopped 3 feet from him. I held up the thick envelope of documents Reggie and I had compiled. The property valuation, the LLC registration, the evidence of his debts. "I know about the house, Stuart," I said. My voice was low enough not to carry to the foursome on the next tee, but hard enough to make him flinch. "I know about Prestige Holdings. I know you are selling your own bad debt to my son for $500,000 more than it is worth." Stuart laughed. It was a wet, dismissive sound. He bent down and picked up his golf ball. He tossed it in his hand. "It is called business, Booker. Buying low and selling high. That is how wealth is built. You would not understand. You spent your life punching a clock. This is not business, I said. This is fraud. You are using my pension to pay off your gambling debts. You are using my son as a bagman. Stuart stepped closer. He smelled of gin and expensive cologne. His eyes were cold and watery. Let us be clear about something, Booker. I am not using your son. Your son begged for this. Darius is a weak man. He walks around terrified that my daughter is going to leave him. He knows she is out of his league. He knows he cannot provide the life she wants. So when I offered him a solution, he jumped at it. He is a puppy, Booker. He will do whatever he is told just to keep Tiffany happy. He would sign his own death warrant if she asked him to. I felt a surge of rage so hot it almost blinded me. He was talking about my flesh and blood like he was a pet. He is my son, I said, and I am not going to let you destroy him. Stuart shrugged. He is already destroyed. He is drowning in debt. This house deal was his lifeline. If you do not sign that guarantee, he goes under. And Tiffany, well, Tiffany does not stay with losers. She will leave him. She will take your grandson, and Darius will be left with nothing. I stepped forward, my hands curled into fists at my sides. I spent 30 years negotiating with sharks, Stuart. I know a bluff when I see one. I am going to the authorities. I am going to the bank. I am going to blow this whole deal wide open. Stuart did not back down. He smiled a thin, cruel smile that showed his teeth. Go ahead, he said. Go to the police. Who are they going to believe? A respected businessman or a retired factory worker who is clearly losing his grip on reality? I stopped. What are you talking about? Stuart tapped his temple. We are worried about you, Booker. Darius tells us you have been forgetting things, getting aggressive, violent outbursts, throwing people out of your house, screaming at schools. It sounds like early onset dementia to me. I stared at him. The wind rustled the trees, but the world felt silent. You are threatening me, I said. I am stating facts, Stuart replied. If you try to stop this deal, if you try to interfere with my family's finances, we will have no choice but to seek a competency hearing. I have many friends in the medical community, Booker, doctors who owe me favors. It would not be hard to find a physician who agrees that you are no longer fit to manage your own affairs. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper. Think about it. A judge declares you incompetent. Darius gets appointed as your legal guardian. He gets control of your accounts. He signs the mortgage papers himself. And you get sent to a state facility where you can spend the rest of your days staring at the wall. Is that what you want? I looked at this man, this predator in pastel clothing. He was threatening to take my mind. He was threatening to strip me of my personhood, to steal my money. It was the most evil thing I had ever heard. I turned around and walked away. I did not trust myself to speak. If I stayed 1 second longer, I would have put him in the hospital, and that would have only proved his point. I walked back to my truck, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. They were not just going to sue me, they were going to erase me. I drove out of the country club and pulled into a gas station a few miles down the road. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key out of the ignition. I needed to think. I needed to call Reggie. But before I could dial, my phone buzzed in my pocket. An email notification. I looked at the screen. It was an automated alert from the university health system where I had seen my doctor for 20 years. Subject security alert. Unauthorized access attempt detected. I opened the email. It stated that at 10:45 that morning, someone had attempted to access my medical records through the patient portal. The IP address was traced to a location in the suburbs. Winnetka. It had already started. They were not waiting for my answer. While Stuart was distracting me on the golf course, someone, probably Tiffany, was trying to get into my medical history. They were looking for anything they could twist, anything they could use to build a case that I was losing my mind. They were hunting for ammunition. I gripped the phone. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. They were coming for my freedom. They were coming for my life. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked old. I looked tired. But I was not crazy. And I was not done. I started the truck. I was not going home. If they wanted to play dirty, I would show them what the mud really looked like. I knew one thing about bullies like Stuart. They rely on fear. They rely on silence. But I was done being silent. It was time to make some noise. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the phone. It was a heavy black rotary model I had kept since the 80s. Not because I could not afford a new one, but because I liked the weight of the receiver. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, summoning every ounce of exhaustion and frailty I had felt in the last week. I needed to become the man they thought I was. I needed to be the broken old steelworker who had finally been crushed by the weight of the world. I dialed Darius' number. He answered on the first ring, his voice sharp and impatient. "Hello." I let a long silence hang in the air. I let my breath hitch. "Darius," I said, my voice trembling and thin. "I cannot do this anymore, son. The police, the lawyers, the broken windows. I am tired. I just want to see my grandson again. I just want peace." There was a pause on the other end. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the suspicion warring with the greed. "Dad, are you saying what I think you are saying?" "Yes, son," I whispered. "Bring the papers. Bring the guarantee. I will sign. I just want it to be over." I heard him cover the phone, heard the muffled excitement of his voice telling Tiffany that I had folded. He came back on the line, his tone suddenly smooth and solicitous. "That is the right decision, Dad. We just want to take care of you. We will be there in 20 minutes. Do not go anywhere." I hung up the phone. I stood up and walked to the mirror in the hallway. I stooped my shoulders. I practiced a vacant, confused stare. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out a pair of thick, black-rimmed reading glasses. I had bought them at a spy shop downtown 2 days ago. In the bridge of the nose, hidden behind the dark plastic, was a high-definition camera and a microphone. I put them on. I looked at my reflection. I did not look like a predator. I looked like prey. I went to the stove and put the kettle on. I needed hot water. Boiling water. 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. I shuffled to the door, dragging my left leg a little more than necessary. I opened it to find Darius and Tiffany standing there beaming. They looked like sharks that had just smelled blood in the water. They breezed past me into the house, the air of victory rolling off them in waves. Tiffany was carrying a leather portfolio. She placed it on the dining table with a reverence she had never shown for anything in my home. "Sit down, Booker," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We have everything ready." I sat down slowly, gripping the edge of the table as if I needed it for balance. Darius sat next to me. He put a hand on my shoulder. "I am proud of you, Dad," he said. "This is going to make everything better. You will see." Tiffany unzipped the portfolio. She pulled out a stack of documents that was much thicker than a simple loan guarantee. I squinted at them through my special glasses, making sure the camera lens was angled perfectly at the papers. "This looks like a lot of paper," I mumbled, my voice raspy. "What is all this?" "It is just standard paperwork," Booker, Tiffany said, waving her hand dismissively. "To make sure we can handle everything for you properly, we included a power of attorney, just in case your health gets worse. It saves us from having to bother you with every little detail." A power of attorney. They were not just trying to get the house, they were trying to take the keys to my entire life. They wanted the right to sign my name to anything they pleased. I leaned forward, peering at the documents. The text was small and dense. "My eyes are not so good these days," I said. "The letters swim around. I cannot read this fine print, Tiffany. You have to read it to me." Tiffany sighed, a sound of irritation escaping her throat. "We do not have all day, Booker. Just sign at the bottom." I shook my head stubbornly. "Etta always said, never sign what you do not read," I insisted. "Read it to me, Tiffany. Or I cannot sign." She rolled her eyes and looked at Darius. He nodded, urging her to just get it over with. "Fine," she snapped. She began to read, speeding through the legal jargon in a monotone drone, hoping I would zone out. She read about asset management, about banking authority, about real estate transfers. I let her drone on for 5 minutes. Then I held up my hand. "Wait," I said. "Stop. Read that part again. The part about the funds transfer. Where does the money go?" Tiffany huffed. "It goes to the seller, Booker, to pay for the house." I looked at her confused. "To the bank?" I asked. "Does it go to the bank?" "No," she said, her patience snapping. "It goes to Prestige Holdings, to clear the debt." I blinked behind my glasses, making sure the camera caught her face. "Prestige Holdings?" I asked innocently. "That is your father's company, right? So my pension money goes straight to your dad's account to pay off his debts." "Is that it?" Tiffany slammed the paper down. "Yes, you senile old fool," she hissed, leaning across the table, her face contorted with greed. "It goes to my dad. He needs the liquidity to clear his books so the bank will approve the new loan. It is a bridge loan, essentially. Your money pays his debt, he gives us the house, and everyone wins. Are you happy now? Do you understand, or do I need to draw you a picture?" I sat back. I understood perfectly. She had just admitted on camera that this was a money laundering scheme to bail out her father. She had admitted that the transaction was not a purchase but a debt clearance for a third party using my funds. It was fraud, plain and simple, and I had it all in 4K resolution. "Okay," I said, my voice sounding defeated. "Okay, I understand. Where do I sign?" Tiffany pointed a long, manicured finger at the signature line on the bottom of the power of attorney. "Right here." Darius handed me a heavy, expensive pen. I took it in my right hand. My hand was shaking a tremor that was only half feigned. I hovered the pen over the paper. Tiffany and Darius leaned in, their eyes wide with anticipation. They were so close. They could taste the money. I watched the ink tip hover millimeters from the line. I looked at the teapot sitting on a trivet next to the papers. It was steaming. I let my hand drift to the left. Just a little. I reached for the handle of the teapot as if to steady myself. My hand jerked. A violent spasm. I hit the teapot. The ceramic pot tipped over. Boiling water cascaded across the table in a scalding wave. It hit the stack of documents instantly. The paper curled and darkened as it soaked up the water. The ink from the laser printer began to bleed and run, turning the legal contract into a soggy gray mush. Tiffany screamed and jumped back, but not fast enough. The hot water splashed onto her expensive blouse and her bare arms. She shrieked in pain and fury. "You idiot!" she screamed. "You clumsy, stupid old man, look what you did!" Darius scrambled to grab the papers, but they were disintegrating in his hands. "They are ruined!" he shouted. "These were the originals. The notary seal is ruined." I sat there, my hands held up in mock horror. "Oh Lord," I stammered. "Oh Lord, I am so clumsy. My hand just slipped. I am so sorry." Tiffany turned on me, her face a mask of pure hatred. The act was over. There was no more sweet daughter-in-law. There was only the monster. "You did that on purpose," she yelled, lunging at me. "You useless waste of space. We have to print them all over again. Do you know how much that notary cost? Do you know how much time you just wasted?" I shrank back in my chair, clutching my chest. "I am sorry," I wheezed. "I am just an old man. I did not mean to. Please do not yell." Darius held Tiffany back, but he looked at me with cold disgust. "Let us go," he said to her. "We have to go to Kinko's and reprint everything. We will come back tomorrow. And you," he pointed a finger at my face, "you better not drink a drop of water before we get back. You are going to sign these papers dry." He grabbed the soggy mess of pulp that used to be his ticket to wealth and threw it in the trash. He grabbed Tiffany's arm and dragged her toward the door. She was still screaming curses at me, calling me every name in the book. I watched them leave. I watched the door slam shut. I listened to their car peel out of the driveway. The silence returned to the house. I sat up straight. I took off the glasses and set them on the dry side of the table. I looked at the steam rising from the puddle of water. I reached for a paper towel and calmly wiped the table clean. I had the recording, I had the confession, and I had bought myself another 24 hours. My hand was steady as I poured myself a cup of tea from the little bit of water left in the pot. It was not accidental. It was precision. And tomorrow, when they came back, I would not be here. The clock on the wall read 3:14 in the morning, and the rain was hammering against the aluminum siding like handfuls of gravel thrown by an angry god. I was sitting in my armchair in the dark, nursing a cup of cold coffee and watching the streetlights bleed through the wet glass. I knew he would come back. Tiffany would not let him sleep. She would not let him rest until he had delivered my soul on a silver platter. I saw the headlights first cutting through the darkness like searchlights hunting for a fugitive. Then I heard the engine revving too high, the sound of a driver who had lost control of his machine and his mind. The car skidded into the driveway, tires screeching on the wet pavement. A car door slammed. Then the pounding started. It was not a knock. It was an assault. I unlocked the deadbolt and the door flew open. Darius stumbled in. He was soaking wet. His expensive Italian suit was ruined, dark stains of rain and sweat mapping his desperation. He smelled of cheap bourbon and fear, a scent that took me back to the worst nights of my own father. He did not look at me. He looked past me at the table where the ruined papers had been hours before. "Where are they?" he slurred, swaying on his feet. "Where are the new papers? Tiffany printed them. She says I cannot come home without them. She locked the door, Dad. She locked me out." He was shivering. My son, the man I raised to stand tall, was reduced to a shivering mess on my doormat. terrified of a woman who saw him as nothing more than a wallet to be emptied. I looked at him, and I did not feel anger. I felt a deep hollowing sadness that settled in my bones. "Go home, Darius," I said, my voice quiet. "Go sleep it off. We are done here." He laughed, a wet, broken sound that ended in a choke. "We are not done," he shouted, saliva flying from his lips. "We are never done. You owe me. You have always owed me. You think you are some kind of saint because you worked at the mill. You think money makes you a father. You were never a father. You were a ghost. You were a checkbook that came home on weekends to sleep. You think I do not know. You think I do not remember." I tried to close the door to shut out the storm and the accusations, but he shoved his way in with a strength born of hysteria. He staggered into the living room, knocking over a lamp that shattered on the floor. He spun around, his eyes wild and bloodshot. "You killed her!" he screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You killed Mom! You let her die in that hospital alone while you were at a union meeting. You let her work herself to death in that kitchen while you were out saving the world. I hate you for that. I have hated you for 10 years. You let her heart stop because you were too busy being a hero to everyone else." The words hit me harder than his fist ever could. For 10 years I had carried the weight of Edda's death in silence. I had let him believe that she died of a weak heart, that she died because I was too busy working to take care of her. I took the blame because I wanted to protect him from the truth. I wanted him to remember his mother as a saint, not as a woman broken by her son's mistakes. But looking at him now, seeing the hate in his eyes, I realized I had protected him too much. I had shielded him from his own sins, and it had turned him into a monster who fed on my guilt. "You want to know about your mother?" I asked, my voice cutting through his drunken rant like a razor. "You want to know why she died?" "She died because you needed her," I said. Darius froze. "What are you talking about?" I walked to the mantel and picked up the small urn that held Edda's ashes. "She did not die of a heart defect, Darius. She died of exhaustion. Do you remember when you were 18? Do you remember the semester you took off from college to find yourself? You did not find yourself, son. You found a bookie. You racked up $40,000 in gambling debts on the South Side. You came to us crying, saying they were going to break your legs." Darius went pale. "That is a lie," he whispered, backing away. "I paid that back. You paid nothing," I roared, my voice shaking the walls. "Edda paid it. I was laid off that year. The union was on strike. We had no income. But Edda would not let her baby get hurt. She took a job cleaning offices at night. She took a second job washing dishes on weekends. She worked 20 hours a day for 6 months to pay off your mistakes." Her heart did not just stop, Darius. It gave out. She worked herself into the grave to save your life. And I let you believe it was natural causes so you would not have to live with the guilt. I took the hate so you could have the peace. And this is how you repay her. By robbing the man who kept her secret. Darius shook his head violently, stepping back as if I had slapped him. "No," he shouted. "You are lying. You are trying to manipulate me. Mom loved me. She would never blame me. He was not hearing me." The truth was too heavy for his fragile ego, so he rejected it. He looked around the room, his eyes frantic, seeking an escape or a weapon. He spotted the heavy metal safe in the corner of the study, the safe where I kept the deed to the house and my checkbook. "Give me the money," he yelled, lunging toward the study. "I do not care about your stories. I need the money. Tiffany needs the money." He grabbed a heavy brass letter opener from the desk and jammed it into the keyhole of the safe, trying to pry it open. He was like a wild animal, clawing at steel, scratching the paint, desperate and pathetic. "Stop it, Darius," I shouted, moving to intercept him. "You are drunk. You are going to hurt yourself." I grabbed his shoulder to pull him back. He spun around, his face twisted in a snarl I did not recognize. "Get off me, old man," he screamed. He shoved me. It was not a playful push. It was a shove with all the weight of his desperation and his anger behind it. I lost my footing on the rug. I fell backward. My side hit the sharp corner of the solid oak desk. I heard a crack, a sharp, sickening sound like a dry branch snapping under a boot. Pain exploded in my ribcage, stealing the breath from my lungs and blinding me with white light. I collapsed to the floor, gasping, unable to draw air, curling into a ball to protect my chest. Darius stood over me, breathing hard. For a second, I saw horror in his eyes. "Dad," he whispered, reaching out a hand. But then his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. It was Tiffany. The fear returned instantly, erasing the regret. He looked at the safe, then he looked at the desk drawer that had jarred open when I hit it. My checkbook was lying there exposed. "I am sorry, Dad," he muttered, his voice trembling. "I have to do this. She will leave me." He grabbed the checkbook. He ripped out 3 checks, stuffing them into his pocket. He did not check to see if I was breathing. He did not call an ambulance. He turned and ran. I lay on the floor, clutching my side, listening to his footsteps fade into the rain. My own son had left me broken on the floor to save his own skin. I closed my eyes and focused on breathing through the agony. He had taken the checks. He thought he had won. But he did not know that the pain in my ribs was fueling a fire that would burn his whole world to the ground. I reached for my phone. I did not call the police. Not yet. I called Reggie. It was time to end this. Every breath was a negotiation with pain. The cracked rib I had sustained 3 nights ago when my own son shoved me into my desk felt like a jagged shard of glass turning inside my chest. I walked down the center aisle of the Cook County Civil Courthouse, moving with the slow, deliberate shuffle of a man holding himself together with nothing but willpower and duct tape. I refused the cane Reggie had offered me. I refused to look weak. Not today. Not in front of them. I eased myself into the defendant's chair, and the simple act of sitting down sent a spasm of white-hot agony up my spine that made my vision blur. I gripped the table with my good hand and focused on breathing. In, out. In, out. Do not let them see you bleed. Reggie sat beside me. He was calm, a stone wall in a gray suit, but I could see the tension in his jaw. On the other side of the aisle sat the plaintiffs, Darius and Tiffany. They were flanked by their lawyer, a man named Mr. Thorne. He was a caricature of everything I despised about the legal system. He was a young white man with teeth too white and a tan that came from a bottle. He wore a suit that cost more than my truck, and he moved with the oily confidence of a predator who knows the game is rigged in his favor. He did not look at me as a person. He looked at me as a payout, a pinata to be beaten until the money fell out. Tiffany was putting on a performance worthy of an Academy Award. She was wearing a modest gray dress, completely out of character for her, clutching a handkerchief and looking at the judge with wide, fearful eyes. She shrank away from me whenever I looked in her direction, acting as if I were a violent monster who might leap across the aisle at any moment. Darius sat next to her, staring at the polished wood of the table. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. His shoulders were hunched. His expensive suit hung on him like a costume, and he could not lift his head. He knew what he had done. He knew he had left his father broken on the floor of his own home. The shame was radiating off him in waves, but shame does not pay the mortgage. Shame does not stop a lawsuit. He was trapped and he was following orders. The bailiff called the court to order. We stood up. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from groaning as my rib shifted. The Honorable Judge Vance entered. He was a stern, older man with eyes that had seen every lie Chicago had to offer. He sat down and looked over his reading glasses at the 2 tables. Mr. Thorne stood up to give his opening statement. He buttoned his jacket and walked toward the jury box, his movements smooth and practiced. He began to speak, and his voice was a rich baritone designed to charm and manipulate. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "we are here today to discuss a tragedy. Not a tragedy of accident or fate, but a tragedy of broken trust." He pointed a finger at me. "This man, Booker Washington, presents himself as a humble retiree, a victim, but the evidence will show that he is a tyrant, a man who has used his wealth not to support his family, but to control them, to manipulate them, to abuse them." I sat stone still. The lies washed over me like sewage. Thorne painted a picture of a lonely, bitter old man who had begged his son to come home. He claimed I had promised Darius the world. He claimed I had wept and pleaded for them to leave their lives behind to care for me in my declining years. He used words like emotional coercion and financial abuse. He twisted my frugality into a weapon, claiming I hoarded money while my family starved just to watch them beg. He claimed I had a history of violence. He brought up the incident at the school where my name was flagged, claiming it was proof of my unstable nature. He did not mention that Tiffany was the one who put me on that list. He did not mention that I was the one who was shoved. He spun a narrative where Darius was the dutiful son trying to honor his father's wishes, and I was the senile despot who had pulled the rug out from under them for sport. Darius kept his head down the entire time. He studied his hands. He knew it was a lie. He knew I had never asked him for anything. He knew I had pushed him to be independent, to stand on his own 2 feet. But he sat there and let this stranger assassinate my character because he was terrified of the woman sitting next to him. Tiffany nodded along with every accusation, dabbing at dry eyes, looking at the jury with a pleading expression that said, "Please save us from this monster." It was hard to listen to. It is a special kind of hell to sit in a room full of strangers and hear your life twisted into something ugly. I had spent 40 years building a reputation as a man of his word, a man of honor. And in 20 minutes, Mr. Thorne turned me into a villain. I felt the eyes of the jury on me. They saw an old black man with a hard face. They saw the tension in my body, and they mistook my pain for aggression. I realized then how dangerous this was. The truth does not always matter in a courtroom. What matters is the story. And Mr. Thorne was telling a very good story. Then came the pivot. Mr. Thorne walked back to his table and picked up a single sheet of paper. He held it by the corner as if it were a holy relic. "They claim there was no contract," he said, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. "They claim Mr. Washington never promised to pay for the home in Winnetka. They claim this is all a misunderstanding. But ladies and gentlemen, we have proof. We have the smoking gun." He walked to the bench. "Your Honor, I would like to enter Plaintiff's Exhibit A into evidence. It is a notarized gift letter dated 2 weeks ago, signed by the defendant Booker Washington." Reggie stiffened beside me. A gift letter. In the world of mortgages, a gift letter is a document stating that money given to a homebuyer is a gift and not a loan. It is required by lenders to prove that the borrower does not have undisclosed debts. If I had signed a gift letter for $500,000, I was legally on the hook. But I had never signed a gift letter. I had never signed anything. I had spilled water on the only papers they brought to my house. Thorne handed the document to the bailiff, who brought it to the judge. Then he put a copy on the overhead projector. The image appeared on the screen for the whole courtroom to see. It was a standard form letter. It stated that I, Booker T. Washington, was gifting $500,000 to Darius and Tiffany Washington for the purchase of their primary residence. It stated that no repayment was expected. And at the bottom of the page, in blue ink, was a signature. Booker T. Washington. I stared at the screen. The room seemed to tilt. The signature looked real. It had the loop on the B. It had the sharp cross on the T. It looked exactly like the signature I had put on thousands of checks and contracts over my lifetime. Mr. Thorne turned to me, a triumphant smirk plastered on his face. He knew he had won. He had the document. He had the signature. In the eyes of the law, the case was closed. The judge studied the paper for a long moment. He took off his glasses and cleaned them, then put them back on. He looked at the date. He looked at the notary stamp. Then he looked at me. "Mr. Washington," the judge said, his voice booming in the quiet room. He held up the paper. "I want you to look at this document very carefully." I stood up, ignoring the fire in my ribs. I looked at the judge. I looked at my son. Darius finally looked up. His eyes were wet with tears, but there was a hardness in them too. The hardness of a cornered animal. He had gone all the way. He had forged my signature. He had committed a felony to save his own skin. The judge leaned forward, his eyes bored into mine. "Is this your signature?" he asked. The room went silent. The stenographer stopped typing. The jury leaned forward. This was the moment. If I said yes, I lost everything. If I said no, I had to prove it against a document that looked perfect. I looked at the signature on the screen one last time. It was beautiful. It was bold. The lines were smooth and confident. The pressure of the pen was even and strong. It was the signature of a man in his prime. I looked at Darius. I saw the slight tremor in his hand as he gripped the table. I looked back at the judge. "No, Your Honor." I said, my voice steady and loud. "That is not my signature." Thorne scoffed loud enough to be heard. The judge held up a hand to silence him. He looked at me with a strange intensity. "You are under oath, Mr. Washington. You are stating for the record that you did not sign this document." "I did not sign it," I repeated. "Aye. Then tell me, Mr. Washington," the judge asked, his eyes narrowing. "If this is not your signature, why does it look exactly like the samples provided from your driver's license and your voter registration?" I took a deep breath. The pain in my side flared, but I used it. I used it to sharpen my mind. I knew something they did not know. I knew something my son had forgotten because he had not really looked at me, had not really known me for 20 years. "Because, Your Honor," I said slowly, raising my hands so the jury could see them. That signature was written by a man holding a pen in his right hand. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. And I do not have a right thumb. The courtroom buzzed with a low hum of anticipation following the judge's question regarding the signature, but Reggie placed a calming hand on my arm, signaling me to wait. He was a strategist who knew that winning a case was not just about disproving a single piece of paper. It was about dismantling the credibility of the people who presented it. He knew that if we attacked the forgery immediately, Mr. Thorne would simply claim it was a mistake or a clerical error and move on. Reggie wanted to burn the ground beneath their feet first. He wanted to show the jury exactly who Tiffany and Darius really were before he delivered the final blow. He looked at the judge with a calm, respectful expression that masked the shark lurking beneath the surface. Your Honor, before we address the technical validity of this document, the defense would like to call a witness to establish the context and motivation behind this alleged gift. We call Maria Gonzalez to the stand. Mr. Thorne shot up from his chair, objecting loudly, claiming that character witnesses were irrelevant to a contract dispute. But the judge, who was clearly suspicious of the document sitting on his bench, overruled him with a wave of his hand. He wanted to hear the story. He wanted to know why a son would sue his father. The double doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and a small woman in a modest floral dress walked in. She clutched a worn leather purse with both hands and walked with the hesitant steps of someone who has spent her life trying not to be noticed. It was Maria. She had been the housekeeper for Stuart Miller for 10 years. She was the woman who cleaned their toilets, scrubbed their floors, and served their dinners while they talked as if she were a piece of furniture. People like Stuart and Tiffany never realized that the invisible people see everything and hear everything. Maria took the stand and swore the oath, her voice trembling slightly. She sat down and looked at me. Her eyes were kind. She knew who I was, even though we had never met. She knew me through the stories Tiffany told when she thought no one was listening. Reggie approached the stand gently. Mrs. Gonzalez, please tell the court your relationship to the plaintiffs. Maria took a deep breath. I worked for Mr. Stuart Miller and his daughter Tiffany for 10 years, she said, her English heavily accented but clear. I cleaned their house in Winnetka. Reggie nodded. And during your time in the Miller household, did you ever overhear conversations regarding Mr. Darius Washington? Maria looked down at her hands, then she looked directly at Darius. Yes, she said, many times. Reggie asked her to describe a specific conversation from 2 years ago, a conversation that took place in the kitchen of the Miller estate. Maria closed her eyes, remembering. It was a Sunday morning, she began. Mr. Stuart and Miss Tiffany were having brunch. I was polishing the silver in the dining room. The door was open. They were talking about money. Mr. Stuart was angry. He was saying that the creditors were calling and that they needed cash fast. Miss Tiffany told him not to worry. She said she had found a solution. She said she had met a man named Darius. The courtroom was silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. Darius shifted in his seat. He was staring at Maria, his face a mask of confusion. Reggie pressed on. What did she say about Darius? Maria paused. She said he was a little slow, but he was desperate to be accepted. She said he had a father from the South Side who was sitting on a gold mine of a pension and union funds. She said the father was a cheap old man who never spent a dime. And did she use a specific term to describe Darius? Reggie asked. Yes, Maria said. She called him her lottery ticket. She told her father that if she played her cards right, she could get the ring, get the access, and drain the accounts before the old man died. She said Darius would do whatever she told him because he was terrified of losing a woman like her. She laughed about it. They both laughed. They toasted with mimosas while I was on my knees scrubbing the floor. Mr. Thorne jumped up, shouting objection after objection, calling it hearsay, calling it slander. But the damage was done. The jury was looking at Tiffany. They were looking at the woman who had sat there playing the victim, and they were seeing the predator underneath. They saw the cold calculation behind the tears. Reggie turned to Darius. And did you ever hear them discuss the house in Winnetka? Yes, Maria answered. Mr. Stuart told Miss Tiffany that he could not sell the house on the open market because it had structural issues and black mold in the basement. He said he needed a buyer who would not ask questions or do an inspection. Miss Tiffany said not to worry. She said Darius would buy it for whatever price they set because he wanted to impress her. She said they could overcharge him by $500,000 and use the father's money to pay off Stuart's gambling debts. She said it was the perfect crime because it was all in the family. The words hung in the air like smoke. Black mold. Structural issues. Gambling debts. the perfect crime. Maria was not just testifying. She was peeling back the skin of their entire life and showing the rot underneath. She was confirming that my son was not a partner in his marriage. He was the mark. He was the victim of a long con orchestrated by the woman sitting next to him. Tiffany stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor, a harsh sound that made the jurors flinch. Her face was twisted red and ugly, the mask of the demure wife completely shattered. "You lying little maid," she screamed, pointing a finger at Maria. "You were fired for stealing. Nobody believes you. You are just a jealous servant who wants to ruin my life because we let you go. Shut your mouth." The judge slammed his gavel down. Order, he boomed, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "Sit down, Mrs. Washington. One more outburst like that, and I will hold you in contempt of court." Tiffany remained standing for a second longer, her chest heaving, her eyes wild. She realized too late that she had just proven Maria right. She had shown the court the rage and the entitlement that Maria had described. She sank back into her chair, but she did not look at the judge. She looked at Darius. Darius was not looking at the jury. He was not looking at me. He was looking at his wife. For the first time in 3 years, the fog in his eyes was clearing. He looked at the woman he had put on a pedestal, the woman he had betrayed his own father for. He saw the fear in her eyes, but he also saw the truth. He remembered the skipped inspections. He remembered her insistence on buying that specific house. He remembered how she always handled the finances, how she always kept him away from her father's business dealings. The realization was washing over him like cold water. He was not her husband. He was her retirement plan. He was the fool she had laughed about in her kitchen while a maid polished the silver. He pulled his arm away from hers on the table. It was a small movement, a shift of 2 inches, but it was a chasm opening up between them. Tiffany reached for him, trying to grab his hand to maintain the united front, but he flinched away from her touch, as if she had burned him. He looked at me across the aisle. His eyes were wide and hollow, filled with a horror that had nothing to do with the lawsuit and everything to do with the wasted years of his life. He had sold his soul for a woman who called him a lottery ticket, and now the ticket was worthless. Darius walked to the witness stand like a man walking to the electric chair. His legs were heavy, and his skin had taken on the gray pallor of wet ash. He sat down, and the leather chair creaked in the silence of the courtroom. He did not look at the jury, he did not look at the judge, and he certainly did not look at me. He looked at Tiffany. She was sitting in the front row, staring at him with eyes that were hard and cold as diamonds. It was not a look of support. It was a command. Reggie stood up. He did not stride. He prowled. He walked toward the witness box with a thick file in his hand. He placed it on the railing in front of Darius. "Mr. Washington," Reggie began, his voice low and dangerous. "You stated earlier that your father promised you $500,000 because he wanted to help his family. You claimed you and your wife are financially stable and this money was merely a gift to secure a better neighborhood for your son. Is that correct?" Darius licked his lips. "Yes," he whispered. "That is correct." Reggie opened the file. "Then can you explain why DraftKings has a lien on your wages?" The air left the room. Darius flinched as if he had been struck. Reggie pulled out a sheet of paper. "According to these records obtained via subpoena, you have lost $52,000 betting on college football in the last 6 months alone. You have maxed out 3 credit cards trying to chase those losses. You are not buying a house, Mr. Washington. You are trying to stay out of kneecap range of a bookie on the south side. Is that correct?" "Objection," shouted Mr. Thorne. "Irrelevant. It goes to motive, Your Honor," Reggie countered smoothly. "The witness claims he does not need the money. The evidence shows he is drowning." "Overruled," said the judge. "Answer the question." Darius looked at Tiffany. She did not blink. She did not look worried. She looked bored. "I have some debts," Darius mumbled. "Everyone has debts." Reggie leaned in closer. "Not everyone has debts that equal their annual salary, Darius. Not everyone owes money to people who do not use collection agencies. You told your father you needed a bridge loan for a mortgage. But the truth is you needed a bailout because you gambled away your rent money. You lied to your father just like you are lying to this court." Darius was sweating now. Huge drops ran down his forehead, staining his collar. "I did not lie," he stammered. "He promised. He promised to help." Reggie stepped back. He looked at the jury. He let them see the desperation radiating off my son. He let them see a man who was not a victim but a junkie looking for a fix. "I have no further questions," Reggie said. He sat down. I looked at Darius. He was shaking. He looked broken. I thought it was over. I thought Reggie had done enough to show the jury that Darius was unreliable. I thought my son would step down and we could go home. But then Tiffany moved. She reached into her purse. She pulled out a single manila envelope. It was not thick. It looked innocuous. She handed it to Mr. Thorne. She whispered something in his ear. I saw Thorne's eyes widen. He looked at the envelope. Then he looked at Darius. Then he looked back at Tiffany. He nodded slowly, a shark recognizing blood in the water. Thorne stood up. He walked to the witness stand. He did not look friendly anymore. He looked like an executioner. "Mr. Washington," Thorne said, holding up the envelope, "we have established that you have debts. We have established that you are under financial pressure. But there is something else, isn't there? Something you have not told the court. Something you have not even told your father." Darius looked at the envelope. His eyes went wide with terror. He shook his head slightly, pleading with his eyes. "Please, no." Thorne opened the envelope. He pulled out a spreadsheet. It was a printout from the inventory system at the logistics company where Darius worked. "Your wife provided us with this, Mr. Washington." Thorne said, his voice slick. "It appears to be a record of inventory discrepancies at your warehouse. High-value electronics, laptops, tablets, items that went missing on your shift, items that were marked as damaged but were actually sold out the back door." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. I felt a cold hand grip my heart. My son was not just a gambler. He was a thief. He had been stealing from his employer, Thorne continued relentlessly. "The total value of the missing inventory is exactly $48,000, almost the exact amount of your gambling debt. Now here is the situation, Darius. Your employer does not know about this yet, but your wife does. She found these records in your home office." I looked at Tiffany. She was smiling. A small, tight smile of absolute victory. She was blackmailing her own husband. She was holding the evidence of his crimes over his head in open court. The message was clear. "Win this lawsuit, get the money from the old man, pay back the company and cover your tracks, or I will turn this evidence over to the police and send you to prison for embezzlement." She was holding a gun to his head and demanding he pull the trigger on me. Darius looked at her. He saw the trap. He saw that she did not love him. She owned him. If he told the truth now, if he admitted he forged my signature to get the money, he would go to jail for perjury and forgery. If he lost the case, he would go to jail for embezzlement. The only way out, the only way to stay a free man was to destroy his father. Thorne leaned in. "So tell us, Darius. Look at the jury and tell us the truth. Did your father sign that gift letter? Did you see him do it?" Darius looked at me. For a long second, our eyes met. I saw the boy I had taught to ride a bike. I saw the teenager I had taught to drive. I saw the young man I had walked to the college dorms. I saw all the years of sacrifice and love I had poured into him. And then I saw the fear swallow it all. He was weak. He had always been weak. And in the end, a weak man will burn the world to save himself. He looked away from me. He looked at the jury. His voice was flat dead. "Yes," he said. "My father signed it. I was there." I handed him the pen. I watched him write his name. He told me he wanted to save us. He told me it was a gift. The lie hung in the air like toxic smoke. He had done it. He had perjured himself. He had framed me. He had chosen the woman who was holding a knife to his throat over the father who had carried him on his shoulders. Thorne smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Washington." No further questions. Darius slumped in the chair. He looked like a man who had just sold his soul for a discount. He did not look at Tiffany. He stared at the floor, waiting for the lightning to strike him down. I sat there and I felt the last tether snap. The invisible cord that connects a father to his son, the cord made of blood and memory and hope it severed. It whipped back and lashed me across the heart. The pain was worse than the broken rib. It was worse than the grief of losing Etta. It was the death of a dream. I had spent my life trying to give him a better world, and he had used it to build a cage for himself. Reggie looked at me. His face was grim. He knew we were in trouble. The testimony was damning. A son testifying against his father is powerful. The jury looked sympathetic. They saw a man confessing his sins and asking for help. They did not see the blackmail, they did not see the forgery, they just saw a family tragedy. Reggie leaned over. "Booker," he whispered, "we need to hit back hard. We need to destroy his credibility completely. But if we do this, there is no coming back. If we prove he is lying about the signature, he goes to prison for perjury. We are sending him to jail, Booker. Are you sure?" I looked at Darius one last time. I looked at the man who had shoved me into a desk, the man who had let his wife call me a racial slur, the man who was willing to steal my pension and leave me destitute to cover his own crimes. I looked for my son in his eyes, but nobody was home. There was only a stranger in a suit, a stranger who had made his choice. I thought about Etta. I thought about how she died working to pay his debts. I thought about how I had protected him from that truth for so long. I realized that my protection had been his poison. I had never let him face the consequences of his actions. I had always been the safety net. And because the net was always there, he never learned how not to fall. It was time to take the net away. It was time to let him hit the ground. I turned to Reggie. My face felt like it was carved from granite. I did not feel sad anymore. I felt cold. "Finish it," I said. Reggie nodded. He understood. It was not a legal strategy anymore. It was an amputation. I watched Reggie stand up. I watched him pick up the single sheet of paper that would end my son's life as he knew it. I adjusted my gloves. The leather was warm against my skin. I prepared myself for the end. I was not saving my son today. I was saving myself. And sometimes in this hard life, that is the only victory you get. Reggie did not retreat to our table after the cross-examination. He stood in the well of the courtroom, holding the single sheet of paper that Darius claimed was my confession. He held it by the corner as if it were contaminated. He walked toward the bench and placed it gently in front of Judge Vance. "Your Honor." Reggie said, his voice calm and measured, "I would like you to examine the signature on this document one more time. I want you to look specifically at the pressure of the ink and the fluidity of the stroke." The judge put on his reading glasses. He leaned over the bench. He studied the blue ink. Reggie continued, "You will notice, Your Honor, that the signature is firm. The loops on the B and the T are perfectly symmetrical. The line does not waver. The downward strokes are heavy, indicating a strong, confident grip. It is a beautiful signature. It is the signature of a man with full dexterity and control. It is the signature of a man writing with his dominant hand." The judge nodded slowly. "It appears to be a very steady signature, Counselor." Reggie turned to Darius. He did not walk back to the witness stand. He stayed right there in the middle of the room, forcing Darius to look at him across the open space. "Mr. Washington," Reggie said, "you testified under oath that you witnessed your father sign this document. Is that correct?" Darius wiped sweat from his upper lip. "Yes," he said. "I saw him do it. And you testified that he signed it 2 weeks ago in his study." "Yes." "And which hand did he use, Mr. Washington?" Darius blinked. He looked confused by the question. It seemed like a trap, but he could not see the teeth. He looked at me. He looked at my hands resting on the defense table, clad in the black leather gloves I wore every day. He tried to remember, but he could not remember because he had not been paying attention to me for years. He only saw me as a resource, not a person. He fell back on what he knew from childhood. I had always been right-handed. I taught him to throw a baseball with my right hand. I taught him to hammer a nail with my right hand. "He used his right hand," Darius said confidently. "He has always been right-handed." Reggie nodded. He looked at the jury. He looked at Tiffany, who was starting to frown, her eyes darting between her husband and my gloved hands. She sensed the danger before he did. Reggie turned to me. "Mr. Washington," he said, "please stand up." I pushed myself up. The pain in my ribs was a dull roar, but I ignored it. I stood straight. I looked at the judge. "Mr. Washington," Reggie said, "please remove your right glove." The room went silent. The air conditioning hummed. I lifted my left hand and gripped the cuff of the black leather glove on my right hand. I pulled. The leather slid off with a soft whisper. I laid the glove on the table. I held up my right hand. A gasp rippled through the jury box. It started in the front row and moved back like a wave. My right hand was not a hand. It was a ruin. The thumb and the index finger were gone, sheared off at the knuckle. The middle finger was twisted and fused a mass of scar tissue and bone that could not bend. It was the result of a press accident at the steel mill in 1990. A machine had malfunctioned. I had reached in to clear a jam, to save the line, to save the company money. The press came down. It took my dexterity. It took my ability to throw a ball. It took my ability to hold a pen. For 30 years I had hidden it. I wore gloves in public because I did not want pity. I did not want people staring at the sacrifice I had made. I did not want my son to be ashamed of his father's broken body. I had learned to write with my left hand. It was a slow, painful process. My signature now was a shaky, jagged scrawl, a spider crawl of ink that looked nothing like the elegant script on the forged letter. The judge stared at my hand. His eyes were wide. He looked at the document again. He looked at the beautiful flowing signature written by a steady right hand. Then he looked at the claw I was holding up. "Mr. Washington," the judge said, his voice quiet. "How long has your hand been like this?" "Since 1990. "Your Honor," I said, 30 years. I cannot hold a pen. I cannot hold a cup. I write with my left hand and it looks like a child's writing." The judge turned his gaze to Darius. It was a look of pure ice. "Mr. Darius Washington," the judge said, "you just testified that you watched your father sign this document with his right hand 2 weeks ago. You testified that he held the pen and wrote this perfect signature." Darius was staring at my hand. His mouth was open. The color had drained from his face, leaving him the color of old paper. He had forgotten. He had been 10 years old when the accident happened. He had blocked it out, or maybe he just never cared enough to remember which hand was which. He had not looked at my hands in years. He only looked at the checks they signed. Darius stammered. He looked at Tiffany. She was not looking at him. She had her face buried in her hands. She knew it was over. "You forgot, didn't you, son?" I said softly. My voice carried in the silent room. "You forgot that I gave parts of my own body to pay for that school you went to. You forgot that the settlement from this accident is what paid for your first car. You forgot me." Darius tried to speak, but no words came out. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a ledge and realized there was no net. Reggie stepped forward. "Your Honor, the defense moves for an immediate dismissal. The document is a forgery. The testimony is perjury. It is physically impossible for the defendant to have signed this." The judge did not look at Reggie. He was still looking at Darius. "The witness will remain seated," the judge ordered. "Bailiff, secure the doors." The courtroom erupted. The jurors were talking to each other, pointing at my hand. The spectators were whispering furiously. Mr. Thorne was frantically shuffling papers, trying to find a way out of the hole his clients had dug, but there was no way out. The truth was written in scar tissue and bone. I looked at Darius. He was slumped in the witness chair, destroyed. He had tried to frame me, and he had been undone by the very sacrifice I had made for him. He had built a lie on the foundation of my history, and the foundation had crumbled. I put my glove back on. I covered the scars. I did not feel triumph. I felt a hollow ache in my chest where my heart used to be. I had won the case, but I had lost my son. And as the judge reached for his gavel to deliver the final blow, I knew that this victory was the saddest thing I had ever tasted. The sound of the gavel striking the wood was not the sound of justice to my ears. It was the sound of a guillotine blade dropping, and the head in the basket belonged to my own son. Judge Vance did not just dismiss the case. He stood up behind the bench, his face flushed with the righteous anger of a man who has been played for a fool in his own house. He pointed a finger at Darius that shook with rage. "Mr. Washington, you have come into this court of law and you have lied under oath. You have presented forged documents as evidence. You have attempted to use the judicial system as a weapon to defraud a disabled man. This is not a mistake. This is a felony." Darius sat frozen in the witness chair. The blood had drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting under the heat of the lights. He looked at his hand, the hand he claimed had held the pen, and then he looked at my mangled claw. The reality of what he had done finally crashed down on him. He had not just lost a lawsuit, he had committed perjury in open court. Bailiff the judge barked, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a whip. "Take Mr. Darius Washington into custody immediately. I am holding him in direct contempt, and I am referring this matter to the district attorney for prosecution on charges of forgery and perjury." Darius tried to stand up, but his legs gave out. He grabbed the railing of the witness box. "No," he stammered, his voice thin and high like a frightened child. "No, please, I didn't mean to. She made me do it." He looked toward the plaintiff's table, searching for Tiffany. He was looking for his wife to save him. He was looking for the woman who had pushed him into this pit. But Tiffany was not looking at him. She was staring straight ahead, her knuckles white as she gripped her designer handbag. She was already distancing herself. She was already calculating her own survival. The bailiff moved fast. He was a large man with no patience for liars. He grabbed Darius by the arm and spun him around. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was a series of sharp metallic clicks that echoed off the high ceilings. Click, click, click. My son was in chains. He looked at me then. "Dad," he whispered. "Dad, help me." I sat still. My heart was breaking inside my chest, shattering into a million jagged pieces, but my face remained stone. I could not help him. I had tried to help him by teaching him right from wrong for 30 years. I had tried to help him by refusing to sign that mortgage, but he had chosen this path. He had chosen to walk into the fire, and now he had to burn. But the fire was not done burning yet. Just as the bailiff began to lead a sobbing Darius toward the holding cell door, the double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. It was not the media. It was not spectators. 4 men and 2 women walked in wearing dark blue windbreakers with yellow letters emblazoned on the back. FBI. Reggie leaned over to me and whispered, "I told you I sent the file on Prestige Holdings to my old contacts at the Bureau. State crimes are one thing, Booker. Federal mortgage fraud is a different animal entirely." The lead agent walked past the bar. He ignored the judge. He ignored the bailiff. He walked straight to the plaintiff's table where Tiffany and her lawyer, Mr. Thorne, were sitting. Mr. Thorne saw them coming and immediately took a step away from his client, physically distancing himself from the radioactive fallout that was about to land. Tiffany Washington, the agent, said, his voice flat and professional, and Stuart Miller. I turned my head. I had not noticed Stuart sitting in the back row of the gallery. He had been hiding, trying to watch his master plan unfold from the shadows. Now he stood up looking like a rat caught in a flashlight beam. He tried to edge toward the side exit, but another agent was already there blocking his path. Stuart Miller and Tiffany Washington, the lead agent, repeated, "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and federal mortgage fraud." Tiffany let out a shriek that sounded less like a human and more like a banshee. "What? You cannot arrest me? Do you know who I am? My father is a respected developer." The agent did not care who she thought she was. He grabbed her wrists and pulled them behind her back. "We know exactly who you are, ma'am. We have the bank records from Prestige Holdings. We have the trail of shell companies used to inflate property values. We know that the house in Winnetka was appraised at $800,000, and you attempted to secure a loan for $1.2 million using falsified income statements and a straw buyer. Straw buyer. That was what they called my son. He was not a husband. He was not a partner. He was a piece of straw used to kindle a fire." Stuart Miller began to shout, "This is a mistake. I demand to call my lawyer. This is harassment." The agent, slapping cuffs on Stuart, just smiled a tight, humorless grin. "You can call whoever you want from the Federal Detention Center, Mr. Miller, but I suggest you save your breath. We have the emails, we have the wire transfers, and we have the testimony of your former housekeeper, Maria Gonzalez, who established the intent to defraud." The courtroom descended into chaos. It was a scene of absolute destruction. The veil of high society, the mask of wealth and class that Tiffany and Stuart had worn so proudly, was ripped away, leaving only the ugly greed underneath. And then the turning began. It started with Tiffany. As the agents dragged her toward the aisle, she saw Darius being held by the bailiff. Her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "It is his fault," she screamed, struggling against the agents. "He is the one who forged the signature. He is the one who gambled away our money. He told me his father would pay. He lied to me. I am a victim here." Darius stopped crying. He looked at his wife. He looked at the woman he had worshipped, the woman he had stolen for, the woman he was willing to send his own father to the poorhouse for. And he finally saw her. He saw the monster I had seen from the first day she walked into my house without wiping her feet. "You told me to do it," Darius shouted back, his voice cracking. "You printed the letter. You told me if I did not get the money, you would take Leo and leave. You made me do this." Stuart joined the chorus of betrayal. He looked at his daughter with disgust. "You stupid girl," he yelled. "I told you to handle this. I told you to keep the old man quiet. You said he was senile. You said he was an easy mark. You ruined everything." "Shut up, Dad," Tiffany shrieked. You are the one who owes money to the mob. You used me to clean up your mess. They were eating each other alive. The family that had stood so united in their disdain for me, the family that had looked down their noses at my work boots and my pickup truck, was tearing itself apart with teeth and claws. They were not nobility. They were scavengers fighting over a carcass that had turned out to be a trap. I watched them from the defense table. I sat perfectly still. My ribs throbbed with a dull ache, but the pain felt distant now. I watched the police drag my son through one door. I watched the FBI drag his wife and father-in-law through another. The courtroom emptied out slowly. The spectators were whispering excitedly, thrilled to have witnessed the drama. Mr. Thorne gathered his briefcase and scurried out without looking back, abandoning his clients to their fate. Reggie closed his file. "It is done, Booker," he said softly. "It is over." I looked at the empty witness chair where my son had sat and lied. I looked at the table where Tiffany had sat and plotted. "It is done," I agreed. But as I stood up and buttoned my jacket, I did not feel like a winner. I felt like a survivor of a natural disaster standing in the wreckage of what used to be my home. I had won the war. I had protected my dignity and my legacy, but I had lost the peace. I walked out of the courtroom. I walked past the cameras and the reporters. I walked out into the gray Chicago afternoon. The air smelled of rain and exhaust. I took a deep breath. I was alone, but I was free. And for the first time in a long time, I did not have to look over my shoulder. I simply had to keep walking one foot in front of the other, just like I had done every day of my life. The fluorescent lights of the Cook County Jail visitor room hummed with a sound that got into your teeth. It was a cold, sterile noise. I sat on a metal stool bolted to the floor. In front of me was a thick pane of scratched plexiglass. On the other side sat a stranger wearing an orange jumpsuit. It was Darius, my son. He looked 20 years older than he had in the courtroom just 3 days ago. His head was shaved, his face was bruised. He looked small. He picked up the black phone receiver on the wall. I picked up mine. The connection crackled. "Dad," he said, his voice shaking. "Dad, you have to get me out. Please, you have the money. Just post the bail. I cannot stay in here. They know who I am. They know I have soft hands." I looked at him. I looked at the terror in his eyes. For 32 years, I had been the one to fix it. When he broke a neighbor's window, I paid for it. When he failed a class, I hired a tutor. When he racked up debt, I let his mother work herself to death to pay it. I had spent my entire life being the cushion between him and the hard concrete of reality. "I cannot do that, Darius," I said. He slammed his hand against the glass. "Yes, you can," he shouted. "You have millions. You proved it in court. You have secret accounts. Just write a check. I am your son. You cannot leave me in here with these animals." I leaned in close to the glass. "I am not leaving you with animals, Darius. I am leaving you with the consequences of your actions. For your whole life, I taught you that the world was safe. I taught you that if you messed up, Daddy would write a check. I failed you. I made you weak. I made you into a man who would forge his own father's signature because he was too scared to work for what he wanted." He started to cry. Ugly, sobbing tears that ran down his face and dripped onto the orange fabric. "Please, Dad, I am scared." "I know you are scared," I said. "You should be scared. You committed a felony. You betrayed your blood. If I bail you out now, you will never learn. You will come out and you will find another Tiffany. You will find another shortcut, and next time the fall will kill you. This cell is not your punishment, son. It is your classroom. This is the first time in your life you have to stand on your own 2 feet. I hung up the phone. Darius screamed silently behind the glass. He pounded on the partition, begging, pleading, mouthing the words, "I love you." But it was not love. It was dependency. I stood up. I put my hand on the glass for a brief second, covering his face with my palm. "Goodbye, son," I whispered. I turned and walked toward the heavy steel door. I did not look back. I could not look back. If I looked back, I might have crumbled, and I needed to be made of steel one last time. 2 weeks later, I stood in the living room of the house on the south side. It was empty. The furniture was gone. The pictures were packed. The silhouette of Etta's favorite chair was still visible in the dust on the floor. I had sold the house to a nice young couple just starting out. I sold it cheap. I wanted to be rid of it. Too many ghosts lived in these walls now. Ghosts of a happy childhood that turned out to be a lie. Ghosts of a wife who died for a son who did not care. I walked out and locked the door. I tossed the keys to the real estate agent and got into my truck. I drove north. Not to the suburbs, not to Winnetka. I drove to a high-rise condo building downtown near the lake. It had a doorman. It had security cameras. It had a steel-reinforced door. It was a fortress. I bought it with cash. I was done hiding my money. I was done living like a pauper to protect people who wanted to rob me. I furnished it with leather and mahogany. I bought a new television. I bought suits that fit. I started living the life I had earned. But there was one last piece of business. I met Reggie at the bank. We sat in a private conference room. I signed the papers to establish the Leo Washington Educational Trust. I put $2 million into it, but the terms were ironclad. Reggie had written them exactly as I asked. Neither Darius nor Tiffany could touch a cent. Not for housing, not for legal fees, not for food. Leo could not access the money until he was 25 years old, and to get it he had to meet 3 conditions. He had to have a college degree or a trade certification. He had to be gainfully employed for 2 years, and he had to have a clean criminal record. Reggie looked at the papers. "You are ruling from the grave, Booker," he said. "I am not ruling," I said. "I am guiding. I am making sure that the money does not become a curse for him like it did for his father. I am making sure he learns the value of sweat before he learns the value of a dollar." Reggie nodded and notarized the signature. This time, it was my real signature. Shaky, left-handed, but stronger than it had ever been. The leaves in Grant Park were turning gold and red, signaling the end of summer. I sat on a park bench with a cup of hot coffee in my good hand. The wind coming off Lake Michigan was crisp. 50 yards away, a small boy was playing on the swings. It was Leo. He was laughing, kicking his legs toward the sky. Standing near him was a woman in a sensible coat holding a clipboard. She was the court-appointed social worker. Since the arrest, Leo had been placed in temporary foster care. I had petitioned for custody, but the courts moved slow. For now, I had visitation, supervised visitation. It hurt to see him like this. It hurt to know that his father was in a cell and his mother was awaiting federal trial. It hurt to know that his world had been blown apart because of greed. Leo saw me. He jumped off the swing and ran over. "Grandpa," he yelled. He threw his arms around my neck. He smelled like outside and little boy sweat. I hugged him tight. I hugged him with my good arm and my bad arm. I held him like he was the only thing in the world that mattered, because he was. "Are Mom and Dad coming home soon?" he asked, looking up at me with big, innocent eyes. I looked at him. I could have lied. I could have told him a story to make him feel better. But I was done with lies. Lies were the poison that had sickened this family. "Not for a while, Leo," I said gently. "They did some bad things. They have to pay for them. But you have me. You will always have me." He nodded, accepting the truth as only children can. He ran back to the swings. I watched him go. I took a sip of my coffee. It was bitter and hot, and it made me feel alive. I sat back against the bench. I felt the ache in my ribs, but it was fading. I felt the phantom pain in my missing fingers, but it was manageable. I had lost my wife. I had lost my son. I had lost the home I built. But as I watched my grandson fly into the air, I realized I had saved the future. I had cut out the cancer. It had been a brutal, bloody surgery. It had almost killed me. But the patient had survived. I was alone, but I was standing. I was Booker T. Washington, and I was finally free. I learned that severing ties with toxic family is not an act of cruelty, but a necessity for survival. For decades, I believed love meant shielding my son from every consequence, but I was merely crippling his character. True love demands accountability, not blind enablement. You cannot buy respect, and you cannot save those determined to drown in their own greed. By finally saying no, I didn't just protect my assets, I reclaimed my dignity. If you are holding on to people who view you only as a resource, let them go. Peace is worth far more than any bloodline. If you agree that family is defined by loyalty and not just DNA, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of justice.